Dear BGP, I heard that you were on TikTok live last night talking shit. That's a bitch move, BGP. I'm coming for that ass again. It's thoroughly yours. Toxic TikTok trends.
BGP, let's address these outrageous claims you've made. Your anti-blackness and blatant dishonesty are about to be exposed once again, so let's pick up where we left off from the last discussion about craniology and its role in determining race. Your issue is that your mouth runs faster than your brain can keep up. For clarity, I never claimed that the syndicate agreed with me on craniology. You're confusing that with a different point I made, which was that African Americans are descendants of Africans, not Africans themselves. I didn't cherry-pick the article I used in my previous videos. I cited the section that supported my argument directly. The fact that you misunderstood your own stance doesn't change that. You thought you had an aha moment, but you didn't grasp the argument, and the rest of the article didn't help your case either. It's clear from your comments that you don't understand how race was conceptualized historically, which explains why you and others think marrying someone of European descent doesn't impact racial identity, even though their children may inherit a European phenotype. You're missing the core concept of how race is both a social and physical construct. Let's actually show what you said since you accused me of lying. Accusing someone of lying who has receipts of everything isn't smart. You accused me of using pseudoscience to explain skin tone and ancestry. You then go on to say that I was playing Oppression Olympics. I'm going to touch up on that in depth a little later because your anti-blackness won't slide with me. In this screenshot, you're asking how bone structure determines race. In this screenshot, you're asking me to name a single phenotype that can't be found in another race or ethnicity, and I gave you one. The elongated skull. The elongated skull is the most prominent in people of African ancestry. This is what you said, clearly. I don't have to lie about anything. You also accused me of conflating phenotypes with biological processes in relation to race. Well, let's clarify that. I did a simple Google search, and phenotype is indeed biological, as I've said all along. Once again, you've shown that your grasp of science is weak. While race is a social construct, that construct has historically been tied to physical traits. This is also why your misinformation about the transatlantic slave trade continues to persist. The origins of race are intertwined with that very trade, something I've already covered. You should pay closer attention. Our story begins around the mid-1400s in the coastal reaches of Portugal, a pivotal moment in history where the winds of change were blowing across the globe. It was here, against the backdrop of burgeoning exploration and trade, that the seeds of modern racial ideology were sown. Until his death in 1460, Prince Henry sponsored Atlantic voyages into West Africa by the Portuguese to circumvent Islamic slave traders, and in doing so created a different sort of slavery than hadn't existed before. Pre-modern Islamic slave traders, like their Christian counterparts in pre-modern Italy, were not pursuing racist ideologies. They were enslaving what we now consider to be Africans, Arabs, and Europeans alike. At the dawn of the modern world, the Portuguese began to exclusively trade African bodies. Prince Henry's sailors made history when they navigated past the feared black hole of Cape Bojador, off Western Sahara, and brought enslaved Africans back to Portugal. Prince Henry's first biographer and apologist became the first racemaker and crafter of racist ideas. King Afonso V commissioned Gomes de Zurara, a royal chronicler and a loyal commander in Prince Henry's military order of Christ, to compose a glowing biography of the African adventures of his beloved uncle. Zurara finished the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea in 1453, the first European book on Africa. One of Zurara's stories chronicled Prince Henry's first major slave auction in Lagos, Portugal, in 1444. He wrote, "Some captives were white enough, fair to look upon, and well-proportioned, while others were like mulattoes or as black as Ethiops, and so ugly." Despite their different skin colors and languages and ethnic groups, Zurara blended them into one single group of people, worthy of enslavement. Unlike babies, phenomenons are typically born long before humans give them names. Zurara did not call black people a race. French poet Jacques Debris first used the term race in a 1481 hunting poem. In 1606, the same diplomat who brought the addictive tobacco plant to France formally defined race for the first time in a major European dictionary. Race means descent, Jean Nicot wrote in the Trésor de la langue française. Therefore, it is said that a man, a horse, a dog, or another animal is from a good or bad race. From the beginning, to make races was to make racial hierarchy. Gómez de Zurara grouped all those peoples from Africa into a single race for that very reason, to create hierarchy, the first racist ideology. Race-making is an essential ingredient in the making of racist ideas, the crust that holds the pie. Once a race has been created, it must be filled in, and Zurara filled it with negative qualities that would justify Prince Henry's evangelical mission to the world. This black race of people was lost, living like beasts, without any custom of reasonable beings, Zurara wrote. They had no understanding of good, but only knew how to live in a bestial sloth. After Spanish and Portuguese colonizers arrived in the Americas in the 15th century, they took to race-making all the different indigenous peoples, calling them one people, Indians, or Negros de terra, blacks from the land. In 16th century Brazil, Spanish lawyer Alonso de Zuazo in 1510 contrasted the beastly race of blacks as strong for work, the opposite of the natives, so weak who can work only in undemanding tasks. Both racist constructions normalized and rationalized the increased importing of the supposedly strong enslaved Africans and the ongoing genocide of the supposedly weak Indians in the Americas. From 1434 to 1447, Gómez de Zurara estimated 927 enslaved Africans landed in Portugal, the greater part of whom were turned into the true path of salvation. It was, according to Zurara, Prince Henry's paramount achievement, an achievement blessed by successive popes. No mention of Prince Henry's royal fifth, Quinto, the 185 or so of those captives he was given, a fortune in bodies. The obedient Gómez de Zurara created racial difference to convince the world that Prince Henry, and thus Portugal, did not slave trade for money, only to save souls. The liberators had come to Africa. Zurara personally sent a copy of the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea to King Afonso with an introductory letter in 1453. He hoped the book would keep Prince Henry's name before the eyes of the world, to the great praise of his memory. Gómez de Zurara secured Prince Henry's memory as surely as Prince Henry secured the wealth of the royal court. King Afonso was accumulating more capital from selling enslaved Africans to foreigners than from all the taxes levied on the entire kingdom, observed a traveler in 1466. Race had served its purpose. Prince Henry's racist policy of slave trading came first, a cunning invention for the practical purpose of bypassing Muslim traders. After nearly 2 decades of slave trading, King Afonso asked Gómez de Zurara to defend the lucrative commerce in human lives, which he did through the construction of a black race, an invented group upon which he hung racist ideas. This cause and effect, a racist power creates racist policies out of raw self-interest. The racist policies necessitate racist ideas to justify them, lingers over the life of racism. In the vast tapestry of human history, one thread stands out starkly against the rest. It's a concept that was not born of necessity or truth, but of greed. The concept of race was forged with one singular purpose: profit. This insidious social construct didn't just linger in the shadows, it spread its tendrils far and wide, leaving an indelible mark on every corner of our planet. It erected a hierarchy so deeply entrenched that it relegated black people to the lowest rung, while elevating white people to the pinnacle of societal power. This hierarchy manifested in various systems, from healthcare to entertainment to justice, perpetuating injustice at every turn. This is why the notion that black people can be racist is fundamentally flawed. Racism was crafted specifically to denigrate and dehumanize black individuals. Racism isn't merely about hurt feelings, it's the deeply ingrained belief in the inherent inferiority of black people, woven into the fabric of society itself. Do you understand now? And here's the kicker: you claim I'm erasing indigenous history because I won't let you erase Africans from history. That's the covert anti-blackness I'm talking about. You accuse Pan-Africans and black people on TikTok for being anti-native, yet you actively try to downplay the horrors black people endured during the 50 years prior to Columbus and the Civil Rights era.
Trade started, which originally was called the triangular trade, which is why the transatlantic goes from across the Atlantic, not from Africa to Europe, the first victims that were taken across the Atlantic were Taino people. that history has been left out of the narrative. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, but definitely about 10 years ago, when the more generalized public, the everyday people, even knew or started finding out that indigenous peoples were enslaved. Most people didn't even know indigenous. The only thing that they knew was, oh, natives had dinner with the pilgrims, and that was the first Thanksgiving. They had no idea that before that they were enslaving native people. And so it was a big shock to a lot of people. And even now, because even now when I tell people, there are some people who still don't know that history. And they're like, wait, what? Native Americans were also enslaved? Yes, very much so. So when we're talking about how this country was built, we're not just talking about the Southeast. We're not just talking about the Northeast. We're talking about the entire United States. So this country was built on the back of Black and Native people. African and Native people enslaved in both regions, because without Native people building the railroads before they started bringing in the Chinese, you weren't going to have what became what was the Southwest and all these major cities. So like this country was built on all POC's backs. It wasn't just one group of people, and people are going to get highly offended by that. But in my response to that is, don't perpetuate erasure then, because if you're not willing to hear the entire story and hear how the other groups were enslaved, how the other groups were taken advantage of, how the other groups were treated in this historical narrative, then you're not actually a scholar of history. You are somebody who just wants to find your confirmation bias and leave it at that. You know what I mean?
The truth is, you're anti-Black, and it shows in every argument you make. Let's look up the triangle trade since you want to make bold claims again. This search says the triangular trade was a trade route and economic model that involved the exchange of goods and enslaved people between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The trade route was active from the early 16th century to the mid-19th century. Looks like you've embarrassed yourself once again. No matter how you try to swing it, the transatlantic slave trade started with Black people. Let's take it a step further. I Googled, when did the triangular trade start? This is what it brought up. The triangular trade is generally considered to have started around the beginning of the 16th century, marking the early period of European colonization in the Americas and the development of transatlantic slave trade networks between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Time period, primarily from the 1500s to the mid-19th century. Route: European manufactured goods were traded in Africa for enslaved people, who were then transported to the Americas to work on plantations, with the Americas then exporting raw materials back to Europe. Important regions: Western Africa, the Caribbean, and North America. Are you okay? As for your confusion about my family background, you said my father was a Mexican immigrant, yet accused me of not knowing anything about immigration. When I asked you before what policies affected Mexicans that wouldn't apply to Black Americans or Black people in general, you gave me an example from Texas that didn't exclude Black people at all. So who's really gaslighting here? Your argument about Mexican culture being mostly indigenous is another half-truth. Mexican culture is highly mixed, largely European, with elements of Native American and African culture woven in. To claim it's mostly indigenous ignores the colonial history of assimilation and whitewashing across Latin America. Let's address the Oppression Olympics comments you've made about me, including those from your live stream the other night. It's become a recurring theme to downplay the history and experiences of Black Americans, both in the U.S. and globally, and I've noticed this in several of your statements. I've highlighted examples of this attitude on my channel before. What's particularly troubling is that many of the people making these comments are white individuals pretending to be people of color. It's no secret that a lot of the individuals active on TikTok, especially within certain Native circles, are white people trying to pass as brown. I've even recorded several of them admitting to their European ancestry. Everyone faces challenges in life, but make no mistake, the struggles of Black and brown communities are unique and deeply rooted in systemic oppression. I've stated this before and will continue to do so because it's a critical point that often gets dismissed. Many of you, including BGP, believe that by marrying white or lighter-skinned individuals, you can maintain a proximity to whiteness while conveniently claiming to be a person of color when it suits you. I recall an incident involving J.B. Good, who goes by Good Savage, where she claimed that being called white was a racial slur. Let me be clear, you are white, ma'am, and calling you that is simply a statement of fact.
Look white.
Don't hold your head.
They'll tell a native person they look white, yo. It's like, yeah, no duh, I'm white to you, bro. You're fucking black. Really, though.
The reality is that many U.S. native tribes have been increasingly populated by people of European descent. This is an undeniable fact. For hundreds of years, there has been a conscious effort by some to marry into white families, essentially breeding out indigenous traits. Yet, when it's convenient, these same individuals turn around and claim their brown or indigenous heritage. This behavior exemplifies why black people often struggle to find true allies in these communities. Too many of you team up with white individuals and collectively punch down on the black diaspora as a whole. It's disturbing to see white people cosplaying as minorities on TikTok, pretending to be oppressed, while simultaneously posting content that promotes harmful narratives. Claiming all are welcome but racist scum, while using a meme rooted in 4chan's racist culture, is hypocritical and offensive. I've seen several of you adopt this kind of language, which further exposes the insincerity of your so-called advocacy and allyship. The phrase "we was kings" is a racist catchphrase and meme aimed at mocking African Americans and people of sub-Saharan African descent. It originated in 2015 on the website 4chan and is used to ridicule discredited Afrocentric theories, which claim that sub-Saharan Africans are descendants of ancient Egyptians. The phrase is a crude and derogatory distortion of these theories, often paired with phrases like "we was kings" and "kings in sheet," written in a mock imitation of Black American dialect to depict black people as ignorant in comparison to what is perceived as the more civilized ancient Egyptians. These memes commonly feature offensive imagery, contrasting stereotypical depictions of black people with images of Egyptian pharaohs, reinforcing the idea that black people are uncivilized and incapable of achieving the greatness associated with ancient civilizations. The intent behind the meme is to belittle both the Afrocentric theories and those who believe in them, perpetuating harmful stereotypes.